Hello friends, I welcome you again to this course titled as Introduction to Indian Writing in English. Friends, in the last class, we discussed about the author and the text, which is titled as The Anxiety of Indianness, our novels in English. In the last class, we discussed about a very famous Sahitya Akademi Award winning author whose name is Meenakshi Mukherjee. There was a brief description where we saw the achievements and the thought process of Meenakshi Mukherjee. I must say that she has played an important role to establish Indian writing in English as a separate genre. Friends, we can also associate with her ideas and opinions because she wrote in the contemporary era. She was professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. So, the way she has perceived this language, English language, and the way she has observed the Indian scenario of changing the mindset of the common people, the way people are looking towards the language, the way people are observing and perceiving the changes which are happening in the language day to day are, let's say, the area of research for Meenakshi Mukherjee. This book, which she wrote, titled as The Perishable Empire, was award-winning book by Sahitya Akademi. This book is so popular that it is also introduced in the syllabus of foreign universities where Indian writing in English is taught as a separate course. We have specifically identified this work, this text, this essay, The Anxiety of Indianness for your syllabus because we knew that through this essay you would be able to get a glimpse of what Meenakshi Mukherjee has to say about Indian writing in English. Friends, you must not stop only on reading this essay and completing this essay. The soft copy of this essay is available online free of cost. But I must request you to download or purchase this book and read all the essays, all 10 essays which are given in this book. I hope that when you read all the essays, it will give you an idea about the new trends in Indian writing in English. You would be able to create new horizons of how Indian writing in English is changing its shape in the contemporary time. This is also correct that when we want to know about this language, Indian writing in English, this genre, we must study R.K. Narayan or Raja Rao or let's say other writers who wrote in the beginning of the 20th century. But it is also important to read the contemporary writers like Meenakshi Mukherjee, who are, let's say, experts of critical theory, whether it is Indian critical theory or Western critical theory, so that we can create our own, let's say, mindset, our own critical opinion towards Indian writing in English. In today's class, we will discuss the critical analysis of this prose work, of this essay, The Anxiety of Indianness. After the completion of this lecture, you would be able to understand author's intention. What author has to say through this essay? If, let's say, author is saying that we must appreciate our regional languages along with English language, all of us know that. But then what are the arguments which author has to say in support of her statement. So all these arguments, when clubbed together, when compiled together in this essay, creates a holistic opinion towards the ideology which author is propounding. You would also be able to critically analyze her essay, that is the Anxiety of Indianness, as a seminal text, as a text that is different from all other essays written in Indian writing in English. The way this essay, Anxiety of Indianness, is written, when you read it layer after layer, you will go deep into the, let's say, imagination or the portrayal of Indian writing in English. It will be carved on your mind the way, step by step, she has explained everything in this essay. So without wasting any time, let us begin discussion on this essay, The Anxiety of Indianness. Mukherjee's book, The Perishable Empire, has 10 essays in total, in which The Anxiety of Indianness, our novels in English, falls on 9th position. So, I told you in the last class also that this essay is on the 9th position in the content. There are total 10 essays in this book, and this essay, The Anxiety of Indianness, our novels in English, falls on the 9th rank. The epigraph used for The Perishable Empire refers to Macaulay's speech on the Government of India Act of 1833 that foresees an imperishable empire of British arts, morals, literature, and laws. Friends, when you read the epigraph of this book, in which this essay is, let's say, combined, when you read the epigraph, you will find that it has the reference of Macaulay's speech, Macaulay's minutes, which was there in the Government of India Act of 1833. In that speech, he was able to foresee an imperishable empire of British arts, morals, literature, and laws. This is correct, friends. When Macaulay observed that Indian tradition, Indian culture, Indian way of thinking, Indian artistic tradition, it is so rich that when we compare it with the British arts, morals, or literature, we do not find Indian literature or Indian way of writing literature as under the British way of writing literature. Rather, the British arts, morals, literature, and laws are somewhere found little bit inferior to that the Indian one. So we have to understand that Macaulay's minutes were written to, let's say, to spread English language around the globe, specifically into colonies like India. How far that claim was validated in the subsequent colonial and post-colonial history of India is the subject of Meenakshi Mukherjee's book. When we talk about that claim of Macaulay, was Macaulay able to validate it in terms of colonial or post-colonial history of India? Was he confused that this agenda, this propaganda will not be able to become successful in the context of India? All these questions are answered in this book, The Perishable Empire. What remains imperishable, however, is the English language, which has indeed affected the wide range of domains of our cultural history and problematized the role of bhashas, the other, some would say, the legitimate Indian languages. Friends, we can understand through Macaulay's reference that there was a problem, there was an identity crisis with the bhashas of India, the different regional languages of India, and that threat emerged into the Indian subcontinent because of the introducing of English language. English language is spreaded so quickly in the areas of, let's say, India and the other colonies, that the people started talking in that language and they preferred English language more than Indian languages. So, can we say that the legitimacy of the bhashas or the Indian languages was put at stake after the introduction of English language into India? English emerged as the privileged site for a pan-Indian outlook and construction of nationhood that even underwrote India's freedom movement. Friends, when we talk about English language, we can say that it was a privileged language. In pan-Indian outlook, English language was the language of the colonizers, dominance. Through this language, they were able to dominate Indian people and construct the nationhood that even unwrote India's freedom movement. This is right, friends. In English language, many writers have written that Indian freedom struggle is not a glorified act, rather it is a kind of revolution which is brutal and which is not appropriate and which is not organized. So, Britishers and the writers who used English language in their writings, they used it as a weapon to dominate the Indian national movement. The book is divided into two sections which deal respectively with the colonial and post-colonial predicament of English, especially with reference to its engagement with the issue of gender, caste, religion and nation, as well as systems of opposition such as colonial, indigenous and tradition modernity. Well, friends, when we talk about this book, Perishable Empire, we see that the book is divided into two sections. There is one section which deal with colonial and post-colonial predicament of English. Let's say how English initially established itself in the Indian society. Well, the people who were speaking in English, who were writing in English, they talked about the issues of gender, caste, religion, nation, nationality. And they gave their own definitions. Maybe they were not appropriate in the context of India, but they opposed the Indian culture and they tried to demean Indian way of living, Indian lifestyle. On the other hand, we also find a system of opposition such as colonial versus indigenous. Colonial people who were Britishers and indigenous people who were Indians, the natives of India. We also found in that language, let's say, a contrast between tradition versus modernity. Take for example, if any writer in the beginning of the 20th century is writing in Hindi language or the regional languages, that the writer would be considered as traditional writer. And the writer who is writing in English language was considered as modern writer. So an identity crisis happened let's say, in the language, the regional languages of India, because they were considered as traditional. The writers were not able to express their opinions with all kind of, let's say, expansion. So they must use English language to, let's say, express their creative writing skills. As if in the deference of Macaulay's wish, the Indian writers in English in the early years did extol directly or in the veiled manner the virtues of British rule in India. Friends, when we read Macaulay's Minutes, we will find that the same being followed by the writers who initially wrote in English language from India. The writers appreciated British rule. The writers appreciated colonizer who is dominating colonized, but even then, colonizer is supreme. Colonizer is more civilized. Colonizer is, let's say, better kind of human being as compared to colonized. And which is why, in the initial writings, in Indian writing in English, Macaulay became successful in spreading the propaganda of superiority of English language over regional languages of India. Thereafter, English became the language of public discourse, whereas once his mother tongue alone was considered the vehicle of creativity. A view but stressed by two colonial writers, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and Michael Madhusudan Dutt, who, after making false starts in English, devoted themselves to writing exclusively in Bengali. Friends, here Meenakshi Mukherjee says that when Indian writers started writing in English language, English became a language of public discourse. People, rather than started, let's say, talking in their regional languages, their mother tongue, they forcefully learnt English language and started talking in that language only. They left their mother tongue in writing, in creative writing, but they didn't know that only in our mother tongue we are able to express our creativity with all its, let's say, expansion and to the maximum extent. But there were two writers in the Indian society. One writer was Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and the other one was Michael Madhusudan Dutt. These two writers made a false start. They started writing in English language, but they understood that they cannot express their opinions in the same manner like they are feeling. So they left English language and started writing in Bengali, which was their mother tongue. And friends, this is also logical. All of you know that if you are speaking something or writing something in your mother tongue, then the way you express it comes in a perfection. If you express something in the, let's say, foreign language, take for example English language here, then there are various restrictions in the way you think and the way you write. Bankim's first novel, Raj Mohan's Wife, published in 1864, is in English and was then seen as a potent site for discussing crucial issues about language, culture, colonization, and representation. Yet it did not satisfy Bankim's creative urge. Friends, when people read Bankim Chatterjee's first novel, Raj Mohan's Wife, he wrote it in English language. People appreciated his way of writing, how he is crucially raising the issues of language, culture, and colonization in Indian context. How the different ways are represented into his contemporary society. People appreciated all those things, but even then, the writer himself was not satisfied. The writer thought that the creative urge within him is still somewhere, let's say, unfulfilled. He was soon convinced that English carried the inevitable burden of the superiority of British rule. It was the language of polemics, but not the creativity. So friends, later Bankim Chandra felt that when he wrote in English language, there was a kind of superiority complex which is related to the British rule continuously visible in the mind of Bankim Chandra. He considered it as a language of polemics but not of creativity. And he wanted to write with creativity. He wanted to fulfill the creative urge in his mind. notes that in the novels written in the early part of 20th century, the British rule was often condoned, whereas the Mughal rulers were demonized, and a pre-colonial Hindu past carefully constructed as a foil to the present subjugation. Friends, Mukherjee felt that the writers who are thinking of writing in India in the, let's say, early part of the 20th century, they had a mindset that British rule is supreme and Mughal rulers were demonized. The condition of India was very critical in the Mughal Empire, and Britishers are trying to make this country well organized, and they are establishing a good governance system in the country. So, a pre-colonial Hindu past carefully constructed as a foil to the present subjugation. These people, they created, let's say the Britishers created an image that the Hindus used to live with lot of prosperity and happiness before the Mughal Empire. In the Mughal Empire, everything in India was ruined. Now Britishers have come in India, and now they are going to take India back to that glorious past. And thus India will become prosperous in the hands of Britishers. But that was a fake argument. Britishers wanted to establish their own economic setup into the country. So they criticized Mughals. They tried to brainwash the Indians by saying that Indian history was very glorious before Mughals, and we are going to take you back into that glorious time. It is about this time that the idea of Virangana, the female warrior with agency and power, was invoked as women power, an idea that was later nurtured by Gandhi for the freedom struggle. Friends, when writers were trying to write initially in Indian writing in English, a new concept emerged into India, the concept of Virangana, where females were treated as warriors, treated as, let's say, violating the power system in the country. And that, let's say, concept of Virangana motivated Mahatma Gandhi to contribute females into the freedom struggle. He motivated many females to participate into the Indian freedom struggle, because half of the population, which was of females in India, has no relation to making the country free, and which is why the movement was becoming weaker and weaker. It was not, however, a sustained commitment to women power, for as soon as freedom was won, the women was again relegated to the background and the marginalized from social participation, either through elevating her to an abstract principle of Shakti or demeaning her to a position of abject subordination. Friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee in this essay talks about the condition of women in the present century. And it has become like this because of the Indian mindset which was created during British era. In the present time, females are either considered into the set roles of Shakti or any goddess, or their condition becomes even worse than animals. But it is the need of the hour that females should be treated not as goddess or as animal, but equal to males. And this concept of portraying females as Shakti came into Indian mindset in the British era. Meenakshi Mukherjee want to, let's say, modified this way of thinking. She want that females should be treated just like equal to males. Nothing more or nothing less than that. Women became more the sites than the subjects of the debates about them, construed in ways that rendered them completely alienated and absent from the experiences that were being declaimed on their behalf. Friends, when we talk about women in the Indian context, we do not involve females into those discussions. Rather, men are, let's say, talking about women. It is the need of the hour that women should be given equal rights and should be given exposure of discussion at the public places with men, so that the true identity and the true portrayal of Indian women can be carved, let's say, in the mind of the Indian males. Women were alienated, they were absent from the experience which was shared by males in the creative works, in the novels, poems, short stories, etc. Which is why a proper portrayal, a realistic portrayal of women was not carved, was not, let's say, created into these fictional and non-fictional works in India. However, a significant focus of Mukherjee's project is to underline the fact that during the colonial period, there were some women with an irrepressible urge to articulate their experience, even though there has been no sustained tradition of women writing in India. Friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee says that when we talk about the Indian glorious literary tradition in regional languages, we find that there are very few women who got an opportunity to write novels, short stories, poems, etc. At most of the places, males are dominating and males are portraying females in their creative works. When the people read those creative works, they put a set role on the females. That female has to behave in this manner only or that manner only. Now, that set, let's say, image, that set role, which is, let's say, for the females of India, is treating as a burden on their, let's say, shoulders. Females are not able to behave naturally, realistically. Rather, they are always playing a role into, let's say, different stages of their life, which can lead to the identity crisis into the Indian females. She cites the example of Krupa Satyanathan from colonial India, whose two novels, Saguna and Kamla, recently resurrected, provide interesting insight into the female Bildungsroman. Bildungsroman means there is a female character and the journey of her birth to death, how she has progressed in her life, how she has crossed different stages of life. All these things are discussed into these novels, Saguna and Kamla. They are written by Krupa Satyanathan from colonial India. And through these novels, we are able to understand the, let's say, reality of the female mind. How females actually think, because males cannot evaluate it from their mind. Females are different from males. The awakening of the women and their agency figure prominently in these works. But the disruptive social potential of such an undertaking did not go unnoticed. Friends, we can say that the awakening of women and their agency figure prominently in these works. When we talk about these two novels, we see that women are prominently portrayed in these works. But there are some disruptive social potential, some social restrictions, some, let's say, pace which is created into these novels through the social structure, which we cannot, let's say, feel unnoticed in this novel. Society exists and society has imposed some, let's say, ways of living on the females. And the females are playing their set role, which is, let's say, imposed upon them through the social structure. Such writings, therefore, could not acquire a radical edge, as women could not break away from the double code which bound them to a deeply entrenched patriarchy at home, even though they made protestations of an emancipatory outlook and egalitarianism in the public sphere. Friends, we can understand from all these examples that women were not able to break that social setup because they did not get chance to write much. The women writers were very few. The male writers and the male ideology and the male dominance dominated the creative way of writing. And which is why women had to play a double role into the Indian society. The way they actually want to behave and the way they are behaving in the society. The ancient India had the patriarchal system at home, and women have to follow that patriarchal system since their birth. They were free to express their opinion, their outlook on some, let's say, concept, but in the limited sphere of their family, not in the public places, not in the public domain in front of everyone. So we can see that women had limited rights given, which are, let's say, strict to their family environment only. The two women poets, Toru Dutt and Sarojini Naidu, are notable examples of women writing in English. As Mukherjee argues that women were generally kept away from the use of English because of its emancipatory possibilities, which could threaten the orthodox patriarchal structure. Friends, when we talk about the women writers in Indian writing in English, we find two prominent names, Toru Dutt and Sarojini Naidu. But even in their, let's say, creative works, women were generally kept away from the use of English. We find that women in British period India were not allowed to study English language, which is why they were not able to. There were very few, let's say, creative writers in Indian writing in English, like Toru Dutt and Sarojini Naidu. The writers thought that if women will learn English language, they might challenge orthodox patriarchal structure of India. So, Indian, let's say, males preferred learning English language rather than giving opportunities to females for learning that language. But even in case of Naidu, the disruptive potential of English was preempted when Edmund Goose advised her to introduce to us the vivid property of her own voluptuous and unfamiliar providence advice, remarks Mukherjee. Friends, there was an advice given to Sarojini Naidu by Edmund Goose that still people do not know much about the Indian female mindset. And she had an opportunity to express her opinions on something, and she must grab that glorious opportunity. Meenakshi Mukherjee, when analyzed this definition, she was able to say that it was unfortunately taken literally by Naidu, and which be deliberately exoticizing forced itself into the Oriental trap. So, friends, we can see that Sarojini Naidu, rather than portraying the realistic picture of the females and the critical condition of females in the Indian society. She talked more about the, let's say, the outer nature, the greenery, etc. She should have taken that advice in a different way, and rather she should have talked about the female rights in the Indian society. For Naidu, poetry became a stepping stone to politics, and her conventional poetic themes, acceptable to an orthodox society, made it easier for her to practice more radical politics. So, friends, rather than talking about the realism in Indian society, Sarojini Naidu talked about, let's say, conventional poetic themes, the way William Wordsworth used to write, or other, let's say, traditional writers used to like. That kind of poetry writing was liked in the Indian Orthodox society. It made her easier to practice more radical politics, radical between the males and females. She was able to practice it, but she did not took that opportunity to, let's say, the most appropriate extent of speaking about the realism in Indian society. Toru Dutt's poetry, on the other hand, is more given to women's agency than to passive submission. And her well-known poem Savitri is an attempt at retelling mythology which demolishes the retrogressive model of Indian womanhood. Friends, when we talk about Toru Dutt, we find that Toru Dutt had glorified the Indian womanhood, but she had not talked about the problems, the real problems of the Indian females. She was able to give women an agency than to passive submission. And in this way, we can understand that the Savitri poem is an attempt to retell mythology, which demolishes the retrogressive model of Indian womanhood. How Indian womanhood must behave, how Indian women must behave, they must, let's say, prefer their husband's existence more than theirs. Such kind of orthodox Indian ideas were, let's say, motivated in the works of Toru Dutt and Sarojini Naidu. Mukherjee carefully analyzes the constituencies and comparative performance of the Indian writing in English and literatures in the bhashas. When we analyze the work of Meenakshi Mukherjee, we find that she is a minute observer. She was able to constitute and compare the performance of Indian writing in English and literature in the bhashas. Such kind of comparison was not done before. How any Indian writer is writing in English language and how in the same era some writer is writing in Bengali, Hindi or any other language, and what could be the comparative analysis of those two languages. Whereas a writer like Raja Rao can successfully integrate myth and history, realism and fabulation through the medium of English, in most other writers, there is always an anxiety to present something that is peculiarly Indian. Friends, in this essay, Meenakshi Mukherjee says that most of the Indian writers who wrote in English language, they emphasized more on peculiar Indian ways of living and peculiar Indian society portrayal. But when we talk about Raja Rao was a person who was able to successfully integrate myth and history. What is reality? What is illusion in context of India? What is, let's say, fabulation? What is manipulated? What is real? And in the English language, he was able to express all these ideas in a balanced manner. And thus, Meenakshi Mukherjee has appreciated the way Raja Rao has written his works, his novels. In her essay, her means Meenakshi Mukherjee, in her essay, The Anxiety of Indianness, She raises the crucial issues of Indianness that mark an obsessive concern with the novelists writing in English. Friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee uh, in this essay had pointed out a very important point. She says that Indian writers, when writing in English language, are obsessed with, let's say, Indianness. That Indianness is resisting them to, it is restricting them to completely, let's say, open towards the creative skills and write something different which is never written before. The Bhasha writers, on the other hand, do not have to wear the badge of authenticity to declare their Indianness, which they take for granted, nor do the readers have ever questioned it. When she has compared the, let's say, English writing writers with the Bhasha writing writers, the writers who are writing in their regional language, they do not need to prove their Indianness through their works. They know that their readers already had accepted that they had the spirit of true Indianness within their writing, and thus they moved one step ahead and talked about the real creativity in their works rather than proving the very Indian, let's say, ways of expressing things. Mukherjee's argument is that since English in India relates to fewer registers, there is a great pull for the homogenizing and essentializing of reality through erasure of differences. Friends, when we talk about Indian writing in English and literature in Indian context, we find that there are huge differences between the way regional writers are writing and in way, let's say, Indian writers are writing in English language. And in this way, we can understand that there are few registers. Registers means few words, few terminologies which are continuously used in their language. It is perhaps to make up for this loss that the anxiety of Indianness looms large on the cosmopolitan writers, resulting in their over-reliance on ostensibly Indian themes or locales, however removed they themselves may be from the Indian reality. Friends, this is the agony and this is the anxiety of Indian writers who are writing in English language. What is that? The anxiety is that they don't know much about Indian realities, but they have created a different kind of realities in their works. They are cosmopolitan writers. They don't know much about Indian culture. They don't know much about Indian ways of living, but even then they keep on write about Indian locales, let's say Indian regional cultures, which has created a very mythical kind of literature in English language. This is the anxiety of Indianness which is visible in the works of these writers who are writing in English language. Basically, Meenakshi Mukherjee is trying to say that the writers who belong to India and who write in English language, they do not have realistic portrayal of Indian society in their works because they themselves are not realistic. They are confused about Indian society. If we compare their works with the writers who are writing in regional languages or bhashas, these writers are more realistic in their works. To a varying degree, this problem is also faced when the bhasha texts are translated into English, which inevitably results in attenuation of subjectivity. Friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee says that similar problem also occurs when any regional text or bhasha text is translated into English language. Because that, let's say, that way of expression, that way of idea, that flow of ideas, that, let's say, flow of creativity, it completely vanishes when the text is converted into English language. Despite repeated protestations of English's acceptance as an Indian language, it is unlike that the burden of English will wear off. So friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee further says in this essay that rather than we continuously, let's say, protest against English acceptance, that we must accept in the English language and we must write in English language, like we are focusing on Indian languages, this burden of English language will remain on the Indian minds. So rather than thinking like the Indian mindset or English language, we must think in a mother tongue manner, regional manner. In the present day, post-colonial societies subjected to the pressure of the global economy, the demands on writers have been much more complex. She says that when we talk about the present time, the creative writers, the fictional and non-fictional writers, their responsibilities are much more complex as compared to the earlier situation. Why? Because the world has now become a global village and the writers are now a part of global economy. So they have to fulfill and satisfy not only the need of the Indian writers, but also Indian readers, but also the readers who belong to India but who are living abroad. The people who are, let's say, immigrants, who are staying somewhere in other country but who want to know more about Indian culture and society. On the one hand, there is a desire to be rooted in what is perceived as one's culture. On the other hand, one wants to be a part of the cosmopolitan crowd. Friends, this is a burden on the mind of Indian writers now. They want to remain to their culture on one hand. On the other hand, they want to be a part of the cosmopolitan crowd also. A crowd which is a mixture of the people of different ethnicities. So now these writers are confused what way they should follow. Whether they should stick to the Indian realism or they should move towards a fancy world which pretends that it talks about Indian realism, but actually they have created an altogether virtual world portraying the Indian society. But serious writers like Amitav Ghosh and Salman Rushdie are not the ones conditioned by the pressures of a global market. Their art, characteristically individualistic, transcends all segmentations of homogenization. When Meenakshi Mukherjee observes the way Amitav Ghosh writes or Salman Rushdie writes, she can feel that they are not, let's say, under the pressure of the global market. Their art is characteristically individualistic. They have a very different way of writing. They have created that writing style on their own with lot of hard work. And thus, the homogenization which is visible into the works of these writers is not visible in the context of Indian writers who are writing in English language. By enlightening us on such aspects of writing, Mukherjee's book reminds us that the question of India and its relation to the production of culture and knowledge in colonial and post-colonial India has acquired great urgency and significance in the context of cultural politics of today. Friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee says that it is a kind of cultural politics which is happening in India. The writers who do not know much about Indian culture, the writers who are cosmopolitan, want to let's say, transform the traditional culture of India in a completely new culture, completely cosmopolitan culture, which Meenakshi Mukherjee calls as cultural politics. And being a writer, it is her duty to enlighten such aspects of writing. When we read this book, we understand that questions of English and its relation to production of culture and knowledge in colonial and post-colonial India has required greater urgency. We are able to understand in a greater manner that how, let's say, the problems of India need to be addressed in the present century. In this essay, she claims there are exceptions such as Amitav Ghosh, The Shadow Lines, in which, unlike most other Indian novels published during the 1890s, India is neither a metaphor nor a philosophical idea. The novel betrays no anxiety because it attempts to prove nothing and interrogates rather than define the concept of totalizing India. Friends, this is a very good quotation, very good statement given by Meenakshi Mukherjee on Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh. She says that when Amitav Ghosh wrote this novel, he was not able to, he did not want to prove anything like the Indian English novelists of 18 and 90s. He did not want to say that India is a metaphor or any philosophical idea. For him, India was a, let's say, a real country. This novel betrays no anxiety. There is no anxiety in this work, The Shadow Lines, which is visible in the works of other Indian writers who are writing in English language, according to Meenakshi Mukherjee. And why there is no anxiety into this novel? Mukherjee says, because it attempts to prove nothing. There is nothing which writer Amitav Ghosh has to prove in this work. There is, let's say, nothing which he is interrogating in this work. Rather, he is trying to define the concept of totalizing India. He is trying to unify India. He is trying to totalize India. He is trying to create a different kind of image of India, which is very realistic. So, when a writer has nothing to prove, there is a realism which will automatically appear in the work of that writer. Contrary to this idea, when Indian writers who are writing in English language are writing something, some novel or some, let's say, fictional work, they had something to prove. And if they pretend to prove that, automatically the realism will be gone from their works. Their works will not be able to portray the real Indian society because they are trying to prove something which is not appropriate. 2 decades after the publication of Mukherjee's article, it is no surprise that Indian literature has been significantly deepened by writing emerging from the margins of India. Friends, we can conclude when we read this essay that even 2 decades after the publication of this work, almost 20 years after the publication of this article, we can understand that Indian literature has been significantly deepened by writing. And it is coming now from the margins of India, which is expected, but which will reflect the true identity of India. Though ironic, it is perhaps no accident that some of the most critically acclaimed authors like Jahanvi Berua, Anjum Hassan, Anis Salim, Amandeep Sandhu, Astrin Iralu, Tamsula Ao, and Mamang Dai, to name a few, are not yet widely published in Western markets. Friends, Meenakshi Mukherjee points at a very important aspect. She says that these are the names of the regional writers in India who write in their own language, who write about their own locality, about their own region, but they do not get much space in the, let's say, books of international publishers. The Western market do not want to accept their books. They do not want to publish their novels. This is very ironic in the case of India. And we can understand that The critiques of the Western world consider these writers as inferior to those writers who have portrayed a false image of the Indian realism. Meenakshi Mukherjee says that these writers, Temsula Ao, Mamang Dai, etc., these are the writers whose works express the true spirit of India. But they do not get, let's say, much exposure to the Western world, because West has a complete, let's say, rigid lobby of looking at India, and whosoever fits into their parameters of Indian portrayal, they will publish only the works of those writers. I hope that you are now able to understand the point of view of Meenakshi Mukherjee in this essay. The essay still remains, because there are various other things, various other logical points which he is trying to validate in this essay. We are going to discuss them in the next part of this video lecture. But for now, I can say that whatever she has said about the Indian way of thinking, Indian writers, how they are portraying the India into English language, there are various questions which are posed by Meenakshi Mukherjee on those writers. She is not asking these questions to the common people, but she is asking these questions to those well-established writers in the Western world, who think that they know about Indian society, but they actually don't know. This is a question to all those writers. And thus we can say that this essay in itself is a very realistic portrayal of the anxiety of Indianness which lies in the mind of the Indian writers who are writing in English language. This anxiety exists. And this anxiety exists because those writers do not know much about Indian society, Indian realism. Rather, they have created an illusionary world, a fake world, a virtual world through their writings. And when the Western people read their writings, the Western people believe that this is the exact portrayal of India, which is wrong. The readers from the West must read the works of Anjum Hassan, Anis Salim, Temsula Ao, or Estrin Iralu to get an idea of the realistic picture of India. So with this, I end my lecture here, and we will discuss the remaining part of this very interesting essay, The Anxiety of Indianness, in the next part of this video. That is all for today. Thank you so much.